They told me to be independent, which was really just an eviction notice with better PR. 9 years later, I am standing at my little sister's wedding in Savannah, and my mother asks loudly why the piece they cut out has returned. But it is the groom who freezes. He does not see family. He sees the one person who can burn down everything he has been hiding. My name is Kira Whitfield, and for the last 9 years, I have been a ghost in my own history. I stood on the periphery of the pristine, manicured lawn of the St. Julian Resort, a sprawling expanse of aggressive luxury nestled just outside Savannah, Georgia. The air was thick with the specific, heavy humidity of the low country, smelling of salt marsh, jasmine, and money. This was not just a wedding, it was a coronation. The kind of event where the floral budget alone could have paid off my student loans 3 times over, and where the guest list was curated with the precision of a military strike. I was not on that list. Not really. I was here as a +1, a shadow attached to my wife, Marin, whose architectural firm had just landed a massive contract with a subsidiary connected to the groom's family. Was the person they wanted? I was just the accessory, the silent partner in the navy slipdress who knew how to hold a champagne flute and nod at the right intervals. To the 200 people milling around the oyster bar and the string quartet, I was nobody. I was safe. That was the calculation I had made. I had told myself that the sheer size of the event was my shield. It had been nearly a decade. People change, hairlines recede, faces soften or harden, names get buried under new marriages and new titles. I had convinced myself that I could walk through the fire of my past without getting burned, simply because the fire had forgotten I existed. "You okay?" Marin's voice was low, grounding me. She touched my elbow, her thumb brushing against the silk of my sleeve. She looked stunning in a sharp charcoal suit that cut a distinct silhouette against the sea of pastel chiffon gowns surrounding us. "I am fine," I lied, forcing a smile that felt tight at the corners. "Just the heat. It is relentless." "We can leave early," she promised, leaning in close. "Make an appearance at the reception, eat some cake, and vanish. I just need to say hello to the regional director, and then we are free." "Go," I said, giving her a gentle nudge. "Network, charm them. I will find a spot with air conditioning and wait for you." I watched her walk away, cutting through the crowd with that effortless grace I still envied. Marin moved through the world like she belonged in it. I moved through the world like I was waiting to be asked to leave. I turned away from the lawn and the terrifyingly perfect view of the marshes, heading toward the main resort building. The ballroom was inside, a cavernous space of crystal and marble where the reception would be held. I needed to be indoors. I needed walls. Open spaces made me feel exposed. And right now, exposure felt dangerous. The interior of the Saint. Julian was cool, silent, and smelled of lemon polish and old money. I walked down a long corridor lined with portraits of people who had been dead for 100 years, their eyes following me with judgment that felt oddly familiar. My heels clicked against the marble floor, a rhythmic ticking clock that echoed too loudly in the emptiness. I was aiming for the powder room, a sanctuary where I could splash cold water on my wrists and remind myself that I was 26 years old, a senior data analyst, a married woman, and a homeowner. I was not the 17-year-old girl who had packed her life into trash bags and left in the middle of a Tuesday night. I was almost to the door when I heard it. It was a voice, just a voice, but it hit me with the physical force of a blow to the solar plexus. The sound bypassed my brain and went straight to my nervous system, triggering a cascade of adrenaline that froze my lungs. "It is utterly ridiculous. Celeste, the florist promised white hydrangeas, not cream. There is a difference." I stopped. My hand hovered over the brass handle of the restroom door. The voice was sharp, polished, and weaponized. It was a voice that could slice through self-esteem like a scalpel. It was a voice I had not heard in 9 years, except in the nightmares that still occasionally woke me up at 3 in the morning. My mother? The hallway suddenly felt very narrow. I told myself to move. I told myself to open the door, go inside, lock the stall, and wait until the heat death of the universe, but my body betrayed me. It was that muscle memory of childhood, the terrifying instinct that demands you freeze when a predator is near, hoping they do not see movement. "It does not matter now," another voice said. This one was younger, petulant, dripping with an entitlement that had been carefully cultivated since birth. "I just want everything perfect. Is that too much to ask?" Bryn, my sister, the bride, I should have run. I should have turned around and sprinted back to the safety of the humidity and the strangers. But the corridor was a straight line, and there was nowhere to go but forward or back, and I was rooted to the spot. I turned my head. Just an inch. Just enough to see them emerging from the bridal suite further down the hall. They looked like a magazine spread come to life. Celeste Whitfield was wearing a mother of the bride gown in a shade of silver that cost more than my first car. Her hair was an immaculate helmet of blonde, not a strand out of place, her posture rigid with the tension she carried like a handbag. Beside her, Bryn was a vision in white satin, a dress that was structured and architectural, designed to intimidate as much as it was to dazzle. They were talking to each other, heads bent together in a conspiracy of complaints, until they looked up. The silence that slammed into the hallway was absolute. For a second, I thought they might not recognize me. I had cut my hair into a sharp bob. I stopped hunching my shoulders. I wore glasses now. I looked like a woman who paid her own bills. But recognition does not need eyes. It needs instinct, and the Whitfield instinct for detecting a threat was flawless. Celeste stopped walking. Her eyes, the same pale blue as mine, widened slightly, and then narrowed into slits of pure, distilled disdain. It wasn't shock. It wasn't joy. It was the look you give a stain on an expensive rug. "Why is she here?" Celeste asked. She did not say it to me. She said it to the air, or perhaps to the universe, loud enough for a waiter passing with a tray of empty glasses to stumble slightly. She spoke as if I were an inanimate object, a mistake in the decor. "That missing piece we cut out?" she continued, her voice rising, vibrating with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Who let her in?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Pooling somewhere in my feet, I opened my mouth to speak, to say something rational like, "I am here with a guest," or "I am leaving." But my throat had closed up. I was 17 again. I was standing in the kitchen in Briar Glen, Pennsylvania, listening to them explain why I wasn't worth the investment. Bryn stepped forward. The satin of her dress rustled, a sound like dry leaves. She looked at me, and a slow, cruel smirk spread across her face. It was the smile of someone who has won a game I didn't even know I was playing. "She wasn't invited," Bryn announced. She looked at me, then past me, as if searching for security. "This is a private event, for family and friends. You are neither." "Bryn," I managed to say. My voice sounded foreign, thin and reedy. "I am just here with—" "I do not care who you are with," Bryn snapped, her facade of bridal grace cracking to reveal the spoiled steel underneath. "You are trespassing. Mom, call security. I want her removed before people start taking pictures. This is a security issue." "We cut you out for a reason." "Kira," Celeste said, taking a step toward me. Her heels clicked on the marble, each step a punctuation mark of aggression. "You chose to leave. You chose to be independent. So be independent somewhere else. Get out." My hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists at my sides, digging my fingernails into my palms to ground myself. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vomit. But I refused to give them the satisfaction of a breakdown. Not here. Not now. "I am leaving," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. "I have no desire to be part of your show." "Oh, it is not a show," a deep voice boomed from behind them. "It is a standard you never could meet." Wade Whitfield. My father. He stepped out of the bridal suite, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked older, heavier, his face ruddy with the good scotch he had likely been drinking since noon. He looked at me with bored indifference. Still causing scenes. Kira? I thought you would have grown out of that. I am not causing a scene, I said, the injustice of it burning in my chest. I am standing in a hallway. You breathing our air is a scene, Bryn spat. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the end of the hall swung open. Bryn? Honey? It was the groom, Graham Kessler. He walked toward us, looking every inch the prize Bryn had captured. He was tall, with the kind of jawline that suggested senator or CEO, wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He had a glass of bourbon in one hand and a smile fixed on his face. The easy, confident smile of a man who owns the room. The photographer is waiting for the family portraits, Graham said, his eyes fixed on Bryn. We need to go before the light changes. We have a problem. Graham, Bryn said, pointing a manicured finger at me. She showed up, the uninvited sister. Can you believe the audacity? Graham turned, his smile still in place, ready to handle the minor nuisance of a wayward relative. He looked at me, and then he stopped. I watched the color drain from his face. It didn't fade. It vanished, leaving him gray and waxen. The glass of bourbon in his hand tilted dangerously, amber liquid sloshing over the rim and onto his polished shoe. But he didn't seem to notice. His eyes locked onto mine. There was no confusion in them. There was no polite curiosity. There was recognition, and behind the recognition, there was terror. I frowned, confused. I had never met Graham Kessler. I knew his name, knew his face from the engagement photos Bryn had plastered all over social media. But we had never crossed paths, or so I thought. He stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost. But not a ghost of a dead relative, a ghost that held a subpoena. Graham? Bryn asked, her voice losing its edge, replaced by confusion. Honey? Just tell her to leave. Graham did not look at her. He could not take his eyes off me. His chest heaved once, a sharp intake of breath, as if he had forgotten how to use his lungs. You, he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a condemnation. Graham, seriously, Celeste interrupted. Impatient. Just get rid of her so we can take the photos. Stop talking, Graham snapped. The volume of his voice was shocking. It wasn't a shout, but it was commanded with such ferocity that it echoed off the marble walls. The hallway went silent, the kind of silence that happens right before glass breaks. Celeste froze, her mouth open in mid-complaint. Bryn recoiled as if he had slapped her. Wade blinked, his bored expression finally shifting to surprise. Graham took a step toward me, ignoring his bride, ignoring his in-laws. He looked at me with the desperation of a man watching a bomb timer count down to 0. You are Kira Whitfield, he said. His voice was shaking. Yes, I said slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I am my wife's sister, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Technically, Bryn interjected, trying to regain control. But we don't. I said stop talking, Graham roared. Spinning on her, Bryn gasped, clutching her chest. Celeste looked ready to faint. Graham turned back to me. He was sweating now, a fine sheen of perspiration breaking out on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He looked at me, and I saw the gears turning in his head, calculating odds, assessing damage. He didn't see a sister-in-law. He didn't see a family drama. He saw me. He saw me. And in that moment, the pieces clicked into place for him, even if they were still a mystery to everyone else. He recognized me, not as family. He recognized me as the person who could end everything he had been hiding. We need to talk, Graham said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Now, before anyone else sees you. I am not going anywhere with you, I said, stepping back. Please, he said, and the word was terrifying because it sounded like begging. You have no idea what is happening here. I know exactly what is happening, Celeste hissed, stepping between us, her protective instincts finally overriding her shock. Kira is ruining this day, just like she ruins everything. Graham, why are you entertaining this? Graham looked at Celeste, then at Bryn, and then back at me. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, realizing the ground had already crumbled beneath his feet. "She is not ruining the day, Celeste," Graham said, his voice hollow. "She is the auditor." The word hung in the air, heavy and nonsensical to them. "The what?" Bryn asked, wrinkling her nose, but I froze. "The auditor. My job? I was a senior forensic analyst for VantageWeld, a firm that specialized in high-stakes corporate audits and compliance investigations. I spent my days digging through financial graves, finding the bodies that companies tried to bury in spreadsheets and offshore accounts. And Graham Kessler worked for... My mind raced, scrolling through the files I'd been working on for the last 3 months, the massive, tangled web of shell companies and inflated assets involving a mid-sized logistics firm in Atlanta, a firm that was currently under a microscope because their CFO had flagged irregularities in the pension fund. Kessler, Kessler, the signature on the sub-compliance reports, the external consultant who had signed off on the valuations that were currently being flagged as fraudulent. I stared at him. The man in the tuxedo wasn't just my sister's groom. He was the man whose signature I had circled in red ink 3 days ago. "Oh my God," I whispered. Graham flinched. "Kira, listen to me. You're the external consultant," I said, my voice gaining strength, the shock replacing the fear. "You're the one who authorized the transfer of the pension assets to the Cayman Holding Company." Bryn looked between us, her head whipping back and forth. "What are you talking about? Graham is in finance. He manages wealth. He manages fraud," I said, looking straight at my sister. "Kira!" Celeste shrieked. "How dare you!" "Stop it!" Graham shouted again, raising his hands. "Kira, not here, not now. You recognize me," I said, realizing the power dynamic had just shifted so violently the room felt tilted. "You saw my name on the audit request. You knew a K. Whitfield was leading the investigation. You just didn't know she was the sister your fiancé pretended didn't exist." Graham's face was a mask of pure misery. "I thought it was a common name. I didn't know. I didn't know you were this Whitfield." "Well," I said, smoothing the fabric of my dress, feeling the adrenaline sharpen into something cold and hard. "I am..." Bryn looked at Graham, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with self-preservation. "Graham? What is she talking about?" Graham didn't answer her. He was looking at me, and for the first time in 9 years, a member of this family was looking at me with total, undivided attention. "If you say another word," Graham said, his voice low and trembling, "you will destroy this entire family." I looked at Celeste, who was trembling with rage. I looked at Wade, who was watching me with narrow, calculating eyes. I looked at Bryn, the sister who had erased me. And then I looked at Graham, the man who had just handed me the match. "I didn't bring the gasoline, Graham," I said softly. "You did. I just walked into the room." And in the silence that followed, you could practically hear the fuse burning down. The double doors of the ballroom swung open, swallowing us into a world that was aggressively, violently perfect, if the hallway had been a cold splash of reality. The reception was a fever dream of immaculate wealth. The air here was different, scrubbed clean of humidity and replaced with the scent of expensive freesia and the ozone smell of old money. Crystal chandeliers, massive and intricate like upside-down wedding cakes, hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a golden, forgiving light that smoothed out wrinkles and polished the diamonds on the guests' fingers. Soft jazz floated through the space, not played by a speaker system, but by a live band on a raised dais. Their music engineered to be exactly loud enough to fill the silence, but quiet enough to never interrupt a toast. It was a performance, every inch of the room, from the hand-folded silk napkins to the floral arrangements that defied gravity, was a set piece designed to scream stability. I walked in beside Marin, my hand tucked into the crook of her arm, feeling the tremor in my own fingers. We had left Graham in the hallway. looking like a man who had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness, frantically typing on his phone while Wade barked orders into his own device. But Celeste and Bryn had composed themselves with terrifying speed. They had smoothed their expressions, adjusted their silks, and marched into the party as if they hadn't just been standing on the precipice of ruin. I tried to blend in. I tried to make myself small, a skill I had perfected in the 18 years I lived under their roof. I was the background. I was the beige wall. I was the empty chair. But the room felt tight. "Marin, there you are." The voice came from a woman in emerald velvet. Bearing down on us with a flute of champagne in one hand, she was one of Marin's biggest clients, a developer who owned half the coastline. "We were just talking about the sustainability specs for the harbor project," the woman said, looping her arm through Marin's free side. "You simply have to settle a bet between me and Arthur." Marin looked at me, a flicker of apology in her eyes. She squeezed my arm. "I will be right back," she whispered. 2 minutes. "Go," I said, forcing a nod. "Work. It is fine." Marin was pulled into the orbit of the power players. Disappearing into a knot of black tuxedos and designer gowns, I was alone. Being alone in a room full of strangers is usually fine. Being alone in a room full of people who might know your last name, and the scandal attached to it, is suffocating. I moved toward the edge of the room, near the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the dark ocean. I needed air. The oxygen in the ballroom felt recycled, used up by all the laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. I spotted a set of French doors slightly ajar, leading to a stone terrace. Escape. I started toward it, keeping my head down, navigating the obstacle course of waiters carrying trays of lobster canapés. I was 10 feet from the door, 5 feet. Then I heard the sound. Click, click, click. It was a specific frequency of stiletto on marble, a sharp, authoritative tempo that I could identify in my sleep. It was the sound of pursuit. I didn't turn around. I reached for the handle of the French door. A hand clamped around my wrist. It was not a gentle touch. It was hard, the fingers digging into the soft skin between my ulna and the tendons, pinning me in place. It was a grip meant to control, hidden under the guise of connection. "Leaving so soon?" I froze. I took a breath, held it for a count of 3, and turned. Celeste was smiling. To anyone watching from the dessert table 10 feet away, it looked like a mother catching her daughter for a tender moment. She was beaming, her teeth white and straight, her eyes crinkling at the corners in a perfect simulation of maternal warmth. But her grip on my wrist tightened, her nails digging in just enough to promise a bruise in the morning. "Let go of me," I said, keeping my voice low, matched to the ambient volume of the jazz. "You always were a runner," Celeste said, her voice sugary sweet, but pitched low, vibrating with venom. "Things get difficult, and Kira runs away. It is your only talent, really." "I am not running," I said. "I am getting fresh air. Something this room is severely lacking. Don't be clever. Kira, it does not suit you." She stepped closer, invading my personal space, smelling of Chanel No. 5 and Chardonnay. "You think because you found a little leverage in a hallway that you have power here? You are a guest, barely, a rounding error." "I am the error you made," I corrected her. "And now you are terrified because Graham knows it." Celeste's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went flat. "Graham is stressed. He is a high-level executive dealing with complexities you couldn't possibly understand with your state school degree. He will realize you are nothing but a nuisance. He will handle it, and we will handle you." She leaned in, bringing her lips close to my ear, like she was sharing a secret. "Still playing independent?" she whispered. "Or did you finally marry into usefulness? That woman, Marin, she is quite successful. Did you latch onto her like a parasite? Is that how you pay for those shoes?" The insult landed with precision. It was designed to trigger the old insecurity, the voice they had planted in my head that said I was incapable, that I was a burden. that any success I had was accidental or stolen. I have a career. Celeste, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline dumping into my blood. I pay for my own shoes, and I pay for my own lawyer. Oh, look who it is. Another voice joined us. Bright, loud, and painfully artificial. Bryn appeared at Celeste's elbow. She had ditched the bouquet but kept the smirk. She looped her arm through Celeste's free side, creating a wall of white satin and silver silk against my navy dress. We didn't even know she would show up, Bryn said, speaking not to me, but to the air around us, pitching her voice so it carried to the nearby table where a group of elderly aunts were pretending to eat cake. We didn't plan for this, did we, Mom? It is so awkward when a estranged family just appears. She looked at me then, her eyes wide and innocent. I hope you are not expecting a seat at the head table. We have a seating chart, and you are not on it. I don't want a seat, I said. I want my wrist back. Celeste didn't let go. She squeezed harder. I looked around. This was the trap. I saw it clearly now. To the left. Mrs. Abernathy, the town gossip, whose newsletter had a higher circulation than the local paper, was leaning in, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. Behind her, two bridesmaids were watching us over the rims of their wine glasses, their eyebrows raised. If I yanked my arm away, I was the aggressor. If I raised my voice, I was the unstable sister ruining the wedding. If I caused a scene, they became the victims of my erratic behavior, a narrative they had been spinning about me since I was 16. They wanted me to explode. They wanted me to scream so they could sigh and say, "See? We told you she was difficult." The anger started in my stomach. A hot, heavy coal. It burned, but I did not let it rise to my face. I had spent 9 years building a life where I didn't have to react to their gravity. I had built a spine out of paperwork and silence. I looked down at Celeste's hand on my wrist. I looked at her manicured nails, the diamonds on her fingers, the tension in her tendons. "You are hurting me," I said. I didn't shout. I stated it as a fact, a data point. "I am guiding you." Celeste smiled. "You are assaulting me," I corrected. The word hung there. It was clinical, legal. It was a word that didn't fit with the soft jazz and the flowers. Celeste's grip faltered for a fraction of a second. "Do not be dramatic," Bryn laughed. A brittle sound. "God, you are always so dramatic. That is why Daddy stopped paying for your school. You just couldn't handle reality." "He stopped paying," I said, looking Bryn in the eye. "Because he needed the money for your DUI settlement." Bryn's mouth snapped shut. The smile vanished. The group of aunts at the nearby table went very still. Mrs. Abernathy lowered her fork. "That is a lie," Celeste hissed, finally releasing my wrist as if I burned her. "Keep your voice down." "My voice is perfectly level," I said. I rubbed my wrist where 4 red crescents were starting to form. "I am here as a guest of Marin's. I am invited. I am not here to fight. I am not here to audition for a role in your play." I took a step back, creating physical distance. I adjusted my sleeve, covering the marks. "But let's be clear," I continued, keeping my tone mild, the way one speaks to a turbulent client. "I am not the 17-year-old girl you evicted. I am an adult woman with a very low tolerance for revisionist history. If you want me to be invisible, stop looking at me, stop touching me, and stop lying about me loud enough for the neighbors to hear." "You think you are so smart," Bryn whispered, her face blotchy with suppressed rage. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous." "Bryn," I said, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. "Look at your husband. Look at his face the next time he walks into this room, and then tell me who I should be jealous of." I didn't wait for an answer. I turned my back on them. It was the hardest thing I had to do all night. Every instinct screamed that turning my back exposed my neck, that they would strike, that they would grab me again, but I forced my legs to move. 1 step, 2 steps, I walked toward the French doors, pushing them open. The humid night air hit me, thick and heavy, but it felt cleaner than the air conditioning inside. I walked to the edge of the stone railing and gripped the cold concrete. Inside, the jazz band swelled into a crescendo. The chatter resumed. A little louder this time, the hum of speculation starting to circulate through the room like a virus. I knew what they were saying. I knew Celeste was already spinning the story at the table behind me. Poor Kira. So troubled. We try so hard. Let them talk. I looked down at my wrist. The marks were fading. But the memory of the grip was still there. They thought they could squeeze me until I broke. They thought I was still the porcelain doll they had thrown away. But they had forgotten one thing about broken porcelain. It is sharp, and if you grab it too tight, you are the one who bleeds. The humidity of the Georgia coast faded, replaced by the dry, stagnant air of a memory I had spent nearly a decade trying to exorcise. Standing on that balcony, staring into the dark void of the Atlantic. I was no longer 26. The ghost of the girl I used to be superimposed herself over my reflection in the glass. I was 17 years old again, sitting at the kitchen table in Briar Glen, Pennsylvania, watching my future dissolve in the time it took my father to turn a page of his newspaper. The kitchen in Briar Glen was always cold. It was a design choice. My mother insisted. Sleek surfaces, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances that hummed with expensive efficiency. It was a room built for photographs, not for living. I had prepared for that conversation for 2 weeks. I had a folder. I had a spreadsheet. I had done the math down to the last penny. I wasn't asking for the Ivy League. I wasn't asking for a private liberal arts college in New England with equestrian stables and a rowing team. I was asking for the local community college. The tuition was reasonable. It was accessible. It was the only way I could see to bridge the gap between the person I was and the person I wanted to become. "It is $3,200 a semester," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my rehearsal. "That covers tuition and books. I can work part-time to cover my gas and food. I just need help with the enrollment fees and the initial tuition." Wade Whitfield sat at the head of the table. He did not look at the spreadsheet I had pushed toward him. He took a sip of his coffee, black, no sugar. He set the mug down with a deliberate clink that sounded like a judge's gavel. "Kira," he said, and he sighed, the long, weary sigh of a man burdened by an unreasonable demand. "We have discussed this." "We haven't," I argued, keeping my voice soft. "I have good grades. I have the acceptance letter. I just need a start." Wade looked at me then. His eyes were flat, devoid of the warmth fathers are supposed to have for their daughters. He looked at me like I was a bad investment he was trying to liquidate. "You want college?" he asked. "Then figure it out. Be independent." The word hung in the air. Independent. It sounded like advice. It sounded like a moral lesson. The kind of rugged American wisdom printed on inspirational posters. But in the Whitfield house, words often meant the opposite of their dictionary definitions. Independence wasn't a gift. It was an eviction notice. "I am trying to be," I pleaded. "I am just asking for a loan. I will pay you back." "No," he said, returning to his paper. "If you want it, you earn it. We are not handing you a free ride. It builds character." I took my folder. I took my spreadsheet. I walked out of the kitchen, feeling the shame burn hot on my cheeks. I told myself he was right. I told myself I was being entitled. I told myself that struggle was just the price of admission to adulthood. 2 days later, the illusion shattered. I was coming down the stairs, carrying a basket of laundry, when I heard Celeste's voice drifting from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone bright and efficient, the voice she used when she was spending money. "Yes, exactly," she was saying. "We want the deluxe housing package for Bryn, the one with the private bathroom. She simply cannot share a communal shower. It is unsanitary." I stopped. My hand gripped the banister. Bryn was a year younger than me. She was a junior in high school. She wasn't even applying to colleges yet, but they were already strategizing. "And the sorority deposits?" Celeste continued, laughing lightly. "Of course, put it on the card. And the meal plan. The unlimited one. We don't want her worrying about groceries. She needs to focus on her social integration. I stood there, frozen. $3,200 for my education was a character-building impossibility, but $5,000 for a dorm deposit Bryn wouldn't need for another year was a necessity. I didn't scream. I didn't storm into the room and flip the table. That is what people do in movies. In reality, when you realize you are unloved, you don't make a sound, you just go numb. The basket of laundry felt suddenly heavy, filled with the weight of a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the leash. They used independence as a weapon. If I wanted freedom, I had to suffer for it. If Bryn wanted anything, she just had to exist. So I worked. I stopped being a teenager that week. While my friends were going to football games and prom shopping, I was clocking in. I got a job at a retail chain in the mall, folding denim jeans into impossible squares under fluorescent lights that made my eyes ache. I worked the closing shift, leaving the mall at 10 at night, my feet throbbing, but the retail check wasn't enough. So I took a second job. I joined a cleaning crew that serviced the corporate parks on the edge of town, from 6 in the evening until midnight, 3 nights a week. I emptied trash cans for lawyers and accountants. I wiped down glass conference tables where men like my father made decisions that affected thousands of lives. I scrubbed break room sinks that smelled of stale coffee and privilege. I came home smelling of industrial lemon cleaner and exhaustion, and at the end of the month, Wade stood in the kitchen with his hand out. "Rent," he said. $400. You are 18 now. You live under this roof. You contribute. I stared at him. I was sleeping in the same twin bed I had slept in since I was 6. I was eating ramen noodles I bought myself. I was barely home because I was working 2 jobs. And he was charging me rent to exist in a house he owned outright. "I am saving for school," I said, my voice hollow. "Welcome to the real world." "Kira," he said, taking the cash from my hand. He didn't count it. He just shoved it into his pocket. Nothing is free. I learned to navigate the bureaucracy of poverty alone. I sat in the public library, staring at the glowing screen of a computer, trying to decipher the FAFSA forms. They asked for tax returns. They asked for parental financial information. When I asked Celeste for their tax documents so I could qualify for financial aid, she laughed. "Absolutely not," she said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "I am not having the government sniffing around our finances just so you can get a handout. Figure it out yourself." So I couldn't get aid. I was trapped in the middle-class limbo, too poor to pay. But on paper, my parents were too rich for me to get help. I learned about unsubsidized loans. I learned about interest rates that compounded daily. I learned about late fees and the terrifying red text of final notices. I was drowning in paperwork, suffocating in a sea of forms I didn't understand, terrified that one wrong checkmark would land me in jail. That was when Calvin Norwood found me. Calvin was a distant cousin on my father's side, the black sheep of the family, because he had chosen to be a mechanic instead of a corporate shark. He lived in a small, tidy house on the other side of town and smelled of motor oil and honest work. I ran into him at the diner where I was buying a coffee before my cleaning shift. He saw the dark circles under my eyes. He saw the way my hands shook when I held the cup. "You look like you are fighting a war, kid," he said. "I am fine," I said, the automatic response I had been programmed to give. He didn't buy it. He bought me a sandwich instead, and then he listened. 2 weeks later, he met me at a rental office for a studio apartment above a bakery. It was tiny, the floor slanted, and the radiator hissed like an angry cat. But it was cheap. "I can't qualify," I told him, looking at the lease application. "I don't have a credit history. I don't have a cosigner." Calvin took the pen from my hand. He signed his name on the line that said, "Guarantor." "Don't tell them," Calvin said, handing the pen back. "Wade would have a stroke if he knew I was helping you escape." "Why?" I asked him, tears pricking my eyes for the first time in months. "Why are you doing this?" Calvin looked at me, his expression serious. "Because I see what they are doing. Kira, In that house, reality is whatever makes them look good. They will grind you down until you are just a prop in their stage play. You need to get off the stage. He gave me one piece of advice that saved my life. Document everything, he said. People like Wade and Celeste rely on you forgetting. They rely on gaslighting. They will say things never happened. They will say you are crazy. Keep the receipts. Keep the voicemails. Make your own reality. One that they can't edit. So I did. I bought a cheap digital voice recorder. I started saving text messages. I kept a logbook of every dollar I gave them for rent. Every conversation where they promised something and then snatched it away. I didn't do it for revenge. Not then. I wasn't thinking about destroying them. I was thinking about survival. I did it because I needed to know that I wasn't insane. I recorded Wade screaming at me because I didn't clean the gutters on a Saturday, calling me useless, calling me a parasite. Then, 2 hours later, when I confronted him, he asked me in a calm, gentle voice why I was so sensitive. Denying he had ever raised his voice, I would go to my room, put on my headphones, and play the recording back. You are useless. It hurt to hear it, but it was proof. It was real. He said it. I wasn't imagining it. The recorder became my anchor. It was the only witness I had. The night I finally left. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. There was no shouting match. There was no ultimatum. I came home from my cleaning shift at 1 a.m. The house was dark. I walked past the living room and saw a receipt sitting on the counter. It was for a dress, a custom-made prom dress for Bryn. The price on the receipt was $1,400. That was exactly the amount I was short for my next semester's tuition, the amount I had begged Wade for the day before, only to be told that money was tight and I needed to work harder. I looked at the receipt, then I looked at the stairs. I didn't go to sleep. I went to my room and pulled my 2 duffel bags out from under the bed. I packed my clothes. I packed my recorder. I packed my paperwork, my birth certificate, my social security card, the lease Calvin had helped me sign. I moved quietly, a ghost in the house that had never really wanted me. I didn't write a note. A note is a negotiation. A note is a plea for understanding. A note gives them something to analyze, something to mock, something to read to the neighbors to prove how unstable I was. I didn't want to negotiate. I was done bargaining for basic love. I was done paying rent for a room where I wasn't welcome. I carried my bags out to my beat-up Honda Civic. The air was cold and crisp. The streetlights buzzed overhead. I looked back at the house one last time. It looked perfect. The lawn was manicured. The windows were dark and peaceful. It looked like the kind of home where happy families lived. Calvin was right. Reality was whatever made them look good. I got into the car. I turned the key. I didn't rev the engine. I just backed out of the driveway and drove down the street, past the sleeping houses, past the school, past the edge of Briar Glen. I didn't cry until I hit the interstate, and even then, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of sheer, terrifying relief. I was broke. I was exhausted. I was alone, but I was free, and I had the receipts to prove it. The humidity of the terrace had clung to my skin. But as I stepped back through the French doors and into the corridor leading to the ballroom, the air conditioning hit me like a physical wall. It was colder in here, sterilized and quiet, a sharp contrast to the damp, heavy night I had just left. I had intended to bypass the main cluster of the reception entirely. My plan was simple. Locate Marin in the sea of black tuxedos and designer silk, signal that I had reached my limit for toxic nostalgia, and exit through the side doors before anyone could offer me another slice of wedding cake or a backhanded compliment. But plans in the Whitfield orbit rarely survived contact with their gravity. I was halfway down the corridor, the sounds of the jazz band growing louder. When the path was blocked, it wasn't a coincidence, it was an ambush. They were waiting for me. Bryn stood in the center of the hallway, her white satin dress taking up an aggressive amount of space. She was flanked by Celeste and Wade, the three of them forming a phalanx of polished resentment. They had clearly used the few minutes I was outside to regroup, to synchronize their stories, and to decide that my quiet exit was not enough of a victory They needed a public defeat. Graham Kessler stood slightly apart from them, looking like a man who was trying to hold up a collapsing ceiling with one hand. His face was still pale, the sweat on his forehead visible even under the soft gallery lighting. I stopped. I didn't sigh. I didn't roll my eyes. I just stopped moving and let my arms hang loose at my sides, assuming the posture of someone waiting for a delayed train. "There she is," Bryn announced. Her voice was too loud, pitched to carry down the hallway and into the edge of the ballroom where guests were mingling near the bar. She laughed, a brittle, tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. "We thought you had finally taken the hint and left." "I am looking for my wife," I said, my voice calm. "Then I will be gone." "Your wife," Celeste repeated, testing the word like it was a piece of fruit she suspected was rotten. She turned to a couple standing nearby, an older man with silver hair and a woman in pearls, who were pretending to admire a painting but were blatantly listening. "We tried everything with Kira. We really did. But some children they refused to be helped. She was always difficult." Wade nodded solemnly, playing the part of the weary, long-suffering patriarch to perfection. "We gave her every opportunity, but you cannot save someone who wants to drown." "That is my sister," Bryn said, gesturing to me with a champagne flute, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Well, technically, she is the one who couldn't hack it, the one who had to leave because the standards of this family were just too high for her." She looked around, checking her audience, feeding off the attention. "It is sad. Really, watching someone fail to launch." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my face blank. This was the game. They wanted me to snap. They wanted the angry, flailing teenager to reappear so they could point and say, "See? We told you." I refused to give them the footage. Graham stepped forward then. He moved quickly, inserting himself between Bryn and me, his back to his new wife. He looked like he was trying to block a fire from jumping a fire break. "Bryn," Graham said, his voice low and urgent. "Stop. That is enough." "Why?" Bryn asked, her eyes flashing. She stepped around him, unwilling to give up her spotlight. "She came here to embarrass me. Graham, she came here to rub her little life in my face. I'm just telling the truth." "You are not telling the truth," I said. "You are reciting a script. And you are trespassing," Bryn snapped. "Actually," a cool, steady voice came from behind me. "She is waiting for me." I felt a wave of relief wash over me as Marin stepped to my side. She didn't touch me. She knew I needed space when I was cornered, but her presence was a fortress. She stood shoulder to shoulder with me, wearing her charcoal suit like armor, looking at the Whitfields with the dispassionate assessment of an architect looking at a structurally unsound building. "Marin," Celeste said, her smile tightening, "we were just discussing Kira's sudden appearance." "Kira is my guest," Marin said. Her tone was polite but final. "And we were just leaving, unless there is something else you need to say?" Marin's eyes swept over the group, lingering on the guests who had gathered. She was well known in these circles. Her firm had designed half the skyline in Savannah. Her presence legitimized me in a way my bloodline never had. Bryn opened her mouth to fire back a retort, likely something about my dependency, but Graham cut her off. He stared at me. He wasn't looking at my dress or my wife. He was looking at my face, doing mental math that I could see terrified him. He was putting it all together. The name, the face, the job title he had seen on paperwork, the signature he had feared for months. "You are Kira Whitfield," Graham said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that sounded like a sentence. "Yes," I said. "From Vantage Weld," he added. The name dropped into the hallway like a stone into a still pond. For Bryn, the name meant nothing. It was just words. But for the guests standing nearby, the developers, the investors, the men and women who ran corporations and feared the terrifying clarity of a forensic audit, the name caused a ripple. "Vantage Weld?" the silver-haired man near the painting repeated, turning fully toward us. His casual interest sharpened into caution. What is a vantage weld? Bryn asked, laughing nervously. Is that some kind of factory? Did you get a job at a factory, Kira? Graham didn't look at her. He couldn't take his eyes off me. He looked like he was waiting for me to pull a warrant out of my clutch. She is not a factory worker. Bryn, Graham said, his voice rising, too loud to take back. She is a lead analyst. He paused, swallowing hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. She is the lead analyst on the audit my firm is legally responding to. The silence that followed was different from the silence in the hallway earlier. That had been the silence of social awkwardness. This was the silence of liability. The air in the corridor changed instantly. The guests who had been leaning in for gossip now leaned back, their expressions shifting from amusement to self-preservation. In this world, family drama was entertainment, but an active federal audit was a contagion. Nobody wanted to be standing too close to the man who was being investigated, and certainly not when the investigator was standing 3 feet away. Celeste frowned, her perfectly penciled eyebrows knitting together. Audit? Graham, what are you talking about? You said that was just standard paperwork. It is not paperwork, Celeste, Graham said, his voice cracking. It is an investigation into the pension fund allocation. Graham, Wade barked, stepping forward. Keep your mouth shut. This is not the place. But it was too late. The words were out. Bryn looked from Graham to me, her confusion morphing into a different kind of anger. She didn't understand the legal implications, but she understood that I was somehow important, and that was unacceptable. I don't care what she is, Bryn sneered, stomping her foot in a gesture that looked ridiculous in a wedding gown. Throw her out, Graham. She is ruining the vibe. Tell security to drag her out. Graham didn't move. He didn't even blink. He ignored his bride completely, his entire focus locked on me. You knew, Graham whispered to me. You knew who I was. I knew Kessler was the signatory, I said, my voice steady, professional. I was on the clock now. I didn't know Kessler was marrying my sister until I walked into this hallway an hour ago. You have access to the files, Graham said. You have the unredacted ledgers. I do, I confirmed. Then you know, he said. I know enough, I replied. Bryn grabbed Graham's arm and yanked it, her fingernails digging into his tuxedo jacket. Graham, stop talking to her. Why are you looking at her like that? She is nobody. She is the one who cleans offices. She is the one who can send me to prison. Bryn, Graham shouted. The scream tore through the polite atmosphere of the wedding reception. The jazz band in the ballroom seemed to falter for a beat. The guests in the hallway froze. Bryn recoiled, her hand flying to her mouth. Celeste gasped. Wade went a dangerous shade of purple. Graham stood there, chest heaving, realizing what he had just shouted in front of 20 witnesses, including 2 of his own board members. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and pleading. You came here to ambush me, he accused, trying to pivot, trying to make me the villain. You used the wedding to serve me. I am not serving you, I said calmly. I am attending a wedding. You are the one confessing in a hallway. Get her out, Wade growled, moving toward me. I don't care who she works for. Get her off this property. Marin stepped forward, subtly shifting her weight, ready to intervene. But I didn't need her protection. Not for this. I looked at Wade. I looked at the man who had told me to be independent, the man who had mocked me for asking for help with tuition while he bought Bryn a life she hadn't earned. I am leaving, I said, but not because you told me to. I am leaving because I have seen enough. I turned to Graham. And Graham? I said. He flinched. Monday morning, I said. 9 o'clock. Have your counsel ready, because after this conversation, I am going to have to document this interaction as a potential attempt to intimidate an auditor. Graham's knees visibly buckled. He reached out to the wall to steady himself. You wouldn't, he breathed. I am very independent, Graham, I said, using the word like a blade. I do my own work. I took Marin's arm. Let's go. We walked away. We didn't run. We didn't hurry. We walked down the center of the hallway, past the gaping guests, past the frozen family, past the groom who was watching his future disintegrate in real time. Behind me, I heard Bryn start to sob, not a sad cry, but the angry, shrieking cry of a child who has been told no for the first time in her life. "Fix this!" she screamed at Graham. "Fix it!" But as we pushed through the heavy doors and out into the cool, dark night, I knew one thing for certain. There was no fixing this. The receipts were already printed. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind us, muting the jazz band but not the adrenaline coursing through my veins. We were standing in the porte-cochere of the resort, a grand covered driveway illuminated by soft, recessed lighting that made the expensive cars lined up look like jewels in a display case. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the exhaust of idling engines. Marin squeezed my hand, her grip firm and grounding. "Do you want the car?" she asked quietly. "Or do you want to walk until the shaking stops?" "I am not shaking," I said, though I knew it was a lie. My hands were steady, but my insides felt like they were vibrating at a frequency that could shatter glass. "Kira!" The name tore through the humidity like a whip crack. I closed my eyes for a second, inhaling the damp salt air. Before turning around, I had expected this. I had known, deep down, that the Whitfields does not let a scene end unless they are the ones closing the curtain. Bryn was marching toward us across the cobblestones, her heels clacking loudly, echoing off the stucco walls. She had followed us out, and she had not come alone. Celeste and Wade were right behind her, flanked by Graham, who looked like he was walking to his own execution. A dozen guests who had stepped out for cigarettes or fresh air were watching, their conversations dying instantly. The valets paused, keys dangling in their hands, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. "You are not walking away from this," Bryn hissed. Stopping 5 feet from me, her chest was heaving, the satin bodice of her dress straining with her rapid breaths. "You do not get to drop a bomb like that and just leave. It is cowardly." "I am not the one who is afraid. Bryn," I said, my voice level. "I am just the one who is tired." "You are embarrassing me!" Bryn shrieked. Her voice cracked, losing its cultivated polish and revealing the petulant child underneath. "You always do this. Every birthday, every holiday. You had to make it about you. You had to be the victim. And now, on my wedding day, you are doing it again." She gestured wildly at the space around us, at the silent guests, at the shocked valets. "Look at them," she cried. "Look at what you are doing to us." Celeste stepped forward then, sliding instantly into her role as the PR manager of the family reputation. She didn't scream, she didn't scowl, she smiled. It was a terrifying, sugary expression that didn't reach her eyes, which remained cold and sharp as flint. She scanned the nearby guests, making eye contact with a woman in a red dress who I recognized as the wife of a local judge. "Oh, ignore her. Brenda," Celeste called out, her voice light and musical, as if she were apologizing for a puppy that had peed on the rug. "Kira has a history. We try to be patient, but sometimes the medication needs adjusting. You know how it is." The lie was smooth, practiced, and devastating. It framed my anger as pathology. It framed their cruelty as saintly endurance. "I am not on medication, Celeste," I said, the words tasting bitter. "And my history is only messy because you are the author." Wade moved in to flank Graham, placing a heavy hand on the groom's shoulder. He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to sound confidential, but keeping it loud enough for the witnesses to hear. "She is unstable, Graham," Wade said, nodding toward me with a look of sad resignation. "We didn't want to burden you with the details before the wedding. We hoped she would stay away. But you see how she is. She invents things. She creates conflicts to get attention. It is a pattern." Wade squeezed Graham's shoulder, a gesture that looked like support but was clearly a command. "Tell her, Graham," Wade urged. "Tell her we know she is making this up. Tell these people she is lying so we can go back inside and cut the cake." Wade was baiting him. He was offering Graham a life raft. All Graham had to do was agree. All he had to do was nod and say, "Yes, my sister-in-law is crazy. Ignore the audit. Ignore the fraud. It is all a delusion." If he did that, the family would close ranks around him. They would protect him. I watched Graham. He stood frozen under the warm yellow lights of the entryway. He looked at Wade's hand on his shoulder. Then he looked at Celeste, who was still smiling that fixed, brittle smile at the judge's wife. Then he looked at Bryn, who was wiping a tear from her cheek with a theatrical delicacy. And then he looked at me. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like a man who wanted to fight. He looked like a man who had just woken up in a room he didn't recognize. Graham stepped away from Wade's hand. He took a step toward his bride. "Bryn," Graham said. His voice was quiet. It wasn't the booming voice he had used in the hallway. It was soft, curious, and utterly terrifying. "What?" Bryn snapped, sniffing. "Tell her off. Graham, tell her she is ruined." "Where did you go to grad school again?" Graham asked. The question hung in the humid air. Bizarre and disjointed, it was so mundane, so completely unrelated to the screaming match we were having, that it stopped Bryn cold. "What?" she asked, blinking. "Grad school," Graham repeated. His tone was calm, surgical. It was the voice of a man who looked at spreadsheets for a living, a man who found errors in the margins. "You have a master's in art history. Where did you get it?" Bryn laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "Why are you doing this now? You know where I went. NYU?" "Right," Graham said. He didn't look away from her. "New York University. You told me stories about the campus, about the coffee shop on the corner of 4th and Mercer." "Yes," Bryn said, her eyes darting to the guests who were watching this strange interrogation. "I love that coffee shop. Graham, please, everyone is staring." "There is no coffee shop on the corner of 4th and Mercer," Graham said. "I looked it up last week when we were planning the trip. It is a bank. It has been a bank for 20 years. The color drained from Bryn's face. It wasn't a slow fade. It was instantaneous, leaving her skin the color of old parchment. I must have remembered the street wrong," she stammered. "It was a long time ago. Who cares?" "Who was your thesis advisor?" Graham asked. He fired the question immediately, not giving her time to recover. "Graham," Celeste interjected, her smile faltering. "This is hardly the time for a pop quiz. The poor girl is distressed." "Answer the question." "Bryn," Graham said, his voice hardening. "You talked about him all the time. The old professor who loved your analysis of the Dutch masters. What was his name?" "Dr. Arndt," Bryn said. She said it fast, too fast. It popped out of her mouth like a reflex, like a line she had memorized for a test she thought she had already passed. "Dr. Arndt," Graham repeated. "First name?" I called him Professor," Bryn said, taking a step back. "I don't remember his first name. It was 5 years ago." "His name was Robert," Graham said. "Robert Arndt." "Yes," Bryn cried, seizing the lifeline. "Robert, that's him. See? I told you." "Robert Arndt died in 2015, Graham said. The silence that slammed into the porte cochere was heavy enough to crush lungs. A valet dropped a set of keys. They hit the pavement with a chiming sound that seemed deafening. "You said you graduated in 2021, Graham continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Unless you were taking classes via a medium. Bryn, you didn't study under Robert Arndt." Bryn opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Celeste, panic flaring in her eyes. It must have been his son." Celeste improvised quickly, stepping in front of Bryn. "Or a different Arndt. Honestly, Graham, memories get fuzzy. You are being paranoid." "I am not being paranoid," Graham said. He turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. It wasn't kindness. It was the grim acknowledgement of a fellow soldier in the trenches of truth. I am being an auditor. He turned back to Bryn. You lied about the degree. You lied about the time frame. You lied about the loans I paid off for you because you said they were for tuition. I used that money for the wedding, Bryn screamed, the confession ripping out of her before she could stop it. I wanted it to be perfect. For us. You lied, Graham said, shaking his head slowly. I watched him, and I realized suddenly that this wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't even about the audit at Vantage Weld. Graham wasn't angry at me for exposing him. He was terrified because looking at me, the sister they had erased, the unstable one, had forced him to look at the woman he had just married. He was realizing that if they could lie about a human being, if they could edit a daughter out of existence and rewrite her as a villain, then lying about a degree was nothing. Lying about money was nothing. He was spotting the pattern. He was seeing the machinery of the Whitfield reality distortion field, and he realized he was trapped inside it. Why are you interrogating me on my wedding day? Bryn wailed, playing her final card. Absolute victimhood. She burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. You are ruining everything. You are supposed to be on my side. I am on the side of the facts, Graham said softly. And right now, the facts are not adding up. Marin leaned close to my ear. Kira, she whispered, we need to go. Now, before this turns into something we can't testify our way out of. Not yet, I whispered back. Kira, please, Marin urged. You have done what you came to do. He knows. Let them eat each other. No, I said. I can't leave yet. I couldn't leave because Celeste was already regrouping. I could see it in her eyes. She was watching the guests, gauging their reaction to Bryn's tears. She was preparing to spin this. She would say Graham was drunk. She would say I had poisoned him with lies. She would say I had forged documents. As long as I remained the villain in their narrative, they could survive this. They could convince Graham that he was confused, that he was stressed, that I was the source of the chaos. I had to break the narrative. I stepped forward. I moved out of the shadow of the overhang and into the direct light, standing between Graham and my family. You can spin this however you want when I'm gone, I said, pitching my voice so that the judge's wife and the valet and the cousins by the door could hear every syllable. You can tell them I am crazy. You can tell them I am jealous. You can tell them I ruined Bryn's big day. I looked at Wade, who was glaring at me with a hatred so pure it felt like heat on my skin. I looked at Celeste, whose mask was finally slipping, revealing the panic underneath. But understand this, I continued. I am not the 17-year-old girl you silenced with an eviction notice. I am a forensic analyst with the power of federal compliance behind me. And I have a very long memory. I turned to Bryn, who was sobbing into her hands, peering through her fingers to see if her performance was working. If you are going to make me the villain publicly, I said, my voice hard as diamond, you do not get to complain when the truth becomes public too. Is that a threat? Wade snarled, stepping toward me with a clenched fist. No, Wade, I said, using his first name for the first time in my life. It is a promise. You have spent 20 years curating a perfect image. It would be a shame if someone released the raw footage. I looked at Graham one last time. Check the dates on the invoices. Graham, I said. And then check the dates on the emergency loans you gave them last year. You are good at math. You will figure it out. I turned on my heel. Marin, I said. Now we can go. This time, nobody followed us. The silence behind us was absolute, heavy with the weight of questions that were finally, after 9 years, starting to be asked, as we stepped into the cool, dark night and the valet scrambled to open the door of our rental car. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the structure of their lies collapsing. One loose brick at a time. I stopped. My hand was on the door handle of the rental car, the cool metal a stark contrast to the humid, suffocating air of the driveway. I had intended to get in, drive away, and let the Whitfield family implode in my rearview mirror. But I did not. I stopped, because Graham Kessler had not stopped talking. He had followed us past the threshold of the portico, ignoring the valet who was holding his keys, ignoring the guests whispering by the fountain. He was looking at me with a sudden, sharp clarity that cut through the haze of his panic. The look on his face had shifted. It was no longer just the fear of a man whose wedding was being ruined. It was the shock of a man who had just solved a puzzle he did not know he was holding. "November," Graham said. The word hung in the air, heavy and specific. I turned slowly, keeping my hand on the car door, maintaining the barrier between us. Marin stood beside me, her posture alert, ready to intercept. "November," Graham repeated, taking a step closer, his eyes scanning my face as if mapping it against a memory he had suppressed. "The 14th of November, the compliance meeting in Atlanta, the one in the glass conference room on the 42nd floor." My stomach tightened. I remembered that meeting. It had been a bloodbath. I had flown in to interview the executives of the logistics firm, and the room had been filled with high-priced consultants trying to explain why the pension numbers did not match the bank statements. I had been relentless that day. I had torn through their excuses like wet tissue paper. "You were there," Graham said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "You were the analyst in the gray blazer, the one who sat at the end of the table." He shook his head, a gesture of disbelief. "I didn't recognize you earlier," he continued, speaking to me but sounding like he was talking to himself. "You had your hair pulled back that day, you wore glasses, and you didn't smile, not once. The CFO tried to intimidate you. He raised his voice, threw a binder on the table. Everyone else flinched. But you just looked at him and asked if his outburst was an attempt to obstruct a federal audit." I watched the color drain from Bryn's face. She stood frozen in her satin gown, looking like a statue that was about to crack. She had spent the last year telling Graham a very specific story about me, that I was a failure, a dropout, a mentally unstable girl who cleaned offices and couldn't handle the pressure of the real world. But Graham had met the real me. He had seen me in my element, in a room full of sharks, and he remembered that I was the one with the sharpest teeth. "That was you," Graham said. I remember thinking, who is this woman? I remember telling my partner that the lead analyst was going to be a problem because she could not be bought and she could not be scared. He looked at Wade, then at Celeste. The realization was washing over him, cold and absolute. "You told me she was fragile," Graham said to them, his voice trembling with a mix of betrayal and dawning horror. "You told me she was erratic. You told me she couldn't hold down a job." "She can't," Wade blustered, though his voice lacked its usual booming authority. "It is probably a temp job, a clerical position. She is exaggerating her role. Graham, don't fall for it." "She led the meeting. Wade," Graham shouted, snapping his head toward his father-in-law. "She was the one asking the questions that made the CEO sweat through his shirt. That was not a clerical position. That was the person holding the axe." Bryn made a small, strangled sound. She took a step toward Graham, reaching for his arm, but he pulled away. He looked at her, and the adoration that had been in his eyes just an hour ago was gone, replaced by a clinical scrutiny. "You lied," Graham said, "about everything." "I didn't lie," Bryn cried, her voice high and thin. I didn't want to talk about her. She is the past. Graham, why does it matter?" "It matters," Graham said, his eyes narrowing. "Because if you lied about who she is, I have to wonder what else you are lying about." He looked back at me. The pieces were clicking into place for him, faster and faster. "The documentation," he murmured. "The subledger for the consulting fees, the one we couldn't identify." I said nothing. I didn't have to. The silence was doing the work for me. Graham turned fully toward Bryn. He looked at her as if he were seeing a stranger wearing his wife's dress. "Bryn," he said, and his voice was terrifyingly calm. "Your name showed up in the documentation." The air in the driveway seemed to vanish. The valet, who had been pretending to check his phone, looked up. The judge's wife near the entrance stopped fanning herself. Bryn went rigid. It wasn't the rigidity of indignation. It was the paralysis of a prey animal that realizes there is no cover left. "What?" she whispered. "The audit files," Graham said. "We flagged a recurring payment to a shell entity registered in Delaware. B.A.W. Holdings. We thought it was a vendor, but it stands for Bryn Alexandra Whitfield. Doesn't it?" I watched Celeste. She was standing slightly behind Bryn, and her hand was trembling. It was a small motion, a fine vibration in her fingers as she clutched her silver clutch. But under the bright lights of the portico, it looked like an earthquake. She wasn't trembling because she was angry. She was trembling because she knew exactly what Graham was talking about. "That is ridiculous," Bryn said, forcing a laugh that sounded like glass grinding in a disposal. "You are imagining things. B.A. That could be anything. That could be Big Atlantic warehousing, or anything. You are letting her get in your head." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She planted it," Bryn screamed, pivoting to the only defense she had left. "Look at her. She works there. She put my name in the files to frame me. She is jealous because I have everything she never got." It was a desperate, flailing accusation, the kind that might have worked in the family kitchen 10 years ago. But we were not in the kitchen, and Graham was not Wade. "She didn't plant it, Bryn," Graham said tiredly. "Those transfers are dated 3 years ago, before she was even assigned to the case. And the signature on the incorporation papers? It is yours. I saw it. I just didn't realize it was my fiancé's signature because I didn't think my fiancé was laundering money for a logistics firm." "Laundering?" Wade stepped in, his face turning a dark, dangerous red. He moved between Graham and Bryn, using his physical bulk to try and intimidate the truth back into the shadows. "Watch your mouth, son. You are talking about my daughter. You are talking about your wife." "I am talking about a felony. Wade," Graham shot back. "This is not the place for your little corporate games," Wade snarled, lowering his voice to a menacing growl. "We are at a wedding. We are surrounded by friends. You are going to stop this nonsense. Get back inside and smile for the cameras. We will discuss these misunderstandings in private, when we can control the narrative." He looked at me then, and his eyes were full of a cold, promised violence. "And you," Wade spat. "You have done enough damage. Get out, before I have you removed." I felt Marin shift beside me, ready to step in, but I held up a hand. I didn't need protection from Wade Whitfield anymore. He was a paper tiger, and I was the one holding the match. "You are right, Wade," I said evenly. My voice was not loud, but in the hush of the driveway, it carried like a bell. "This is not the place for corporate games. It is a wedding." I looked at Bryn, who was now weeping silently, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. I looked at Celeste, who was staring at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "But I did not bring the game here," I continued. "You did. You brought me here. You sent the invitation to Marin, hoping to use her status to bolster your own. You dragged me into this hallway. You made it public." I took a step forward, closing the distance between myself and the family that had discarded me. "You wanted an audience," I said. "Now you have one." Graham looked at me. His face was gray. He looked like a man who had just realized the lifeboat he jumped into was made of lead. He had one question left, the only question that really mattered to his survival. "Kira," he said. He waited until I met his eyes. "Did you know?" he asked. "Did you know she was connected to this? Did you come here tonight to serve her? Did you plan this ambush?" It was the question the lawyers would ask. It was the question that would determine if this was justice or vendetta. I paused. I looked at Bryn, the sister who had taken the money meant for my education and used it to build a facade of success. I looked at the parents who had called me useless while they used their other daughter's name to hide their greed. I thought about the years I spent cleaning offices. I thought about the $300 car payments I struggled to make while Bryn drove a convertible paid for by consulting fees. "I did not," I said. The truth of it rang clear and undeniable. I didn't know Bryn was the beneficiary of those shell accounts, I said, my voice steady. I saw the initials, I saw the transfers, but I didn't make the connection. I looked Graham dead in the eye. I didn't know, I repeated. Until I walked into this hallway and heard what my parents were desperate to stop. I didn't know until I saw the terror on your face when you realized who I was. You connected the dots for me. Graham, you handed me the evidence. Graham closed his eyes. He let out a long, shuddering breath. He knew I was telling the truth. He knew that the destruction of his life wasn't a plot I had engineered. It was a trap he had walked into all on his own, built by the lies of the woman standing next to him. She didn't know, Graham whispered to the air. My God. She didn't know. Bryn let out a sob that sounded like a choke. Graham, please. It was just paper. Daddy said it was just for tax purposes. I didn't know it was bad. Ignorance is not a defense. Bryn, Graham said, opening his eyes. They were cold now, empty. Not when the FBI is involved. FBI? Celeste gasped, her hand flying to her throat. That is who we report to. Celeste, I said, opening the car door. When we find fraud of this magnitude, we don't just write a report, we make a referral. I got into the car. I didn't slam the door. I closed it firmly, sealing myself inside the quiet, leather-smelling interior. Marin got in the driver's side and started the engine. As we pulled away, I watched them through the window. They were a tableau of ruin under the expensive lights of the resort. Wade was shouting at Graham. Celeste was clutching Bryn. And Graham was standing apart from them all, staring at the taillights of my car, watching the only person who had told him the truth drive away. I didn't look back again. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I had a message to send to my compliance officer. It was Saturday night, but some things could not wait until Monday morning. The car door was open, the engine of the rental was idling, and I was 1 second away from sliding into the passenger seat and leaving the Whitfield Circus behind forever. But the sound of a gasp, sharp, collective, and horrified, stopped me. I turned back toward the portico. Graham had pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket. His face was illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen, his thumb hovering over a contact. He was not looking at Bryn. He was not looking at the guests. He was looking at the device with the singular focus of a man looking for a lifeline. I am calling the compliance officer, Graham said. His voice was not loud, but in the acoustically perfect driveway, it carried like a gunshot. I am going to ask him to read me the signatory name on the BAW incorporation documents right now. He tapped the screen, and then the mask finally broke. Bryn moved. It was not the graceful glide of a bride on her wedding day. It was a lunge. It was the desperate, jerky motion of someone who sees the guillotine blade coming down and instinctively tries to catch it with their bare hands. She snatched the phone from Graham's hand. It happened so fast that Graham didn't even have time to close his fingers around it. One moment he was dialing. The next, his hand was empty, suspended in the air. No! Bryn shrieked. The sound tore through the night. It wasn't a word. It was a frequency. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated panic disguised as outrage. Graham stared at his empty hand, then slowly lowered it. He looked at his new wife. Bryn was clutching the phone to her chest with both hands, breathing hard, her eyes wide and wild. The perfect mascara was beginning to smudge. Not from tears of joy, but from the sweat of terror. Bryn, Graham said. His voice was terrifyingly quiet. Give me the phone. No, Bryn panted, taking a step back, her heels scraping loudly against the cobblestones. You are not doing this. You are not checking up on me. Not today. This is my day. Don't do this, Graham warned. The room, or rather, the driveway, heard the fear under his control. It was the plea of a man begging his wife not to confirm his worst nightmare. He wasn't asking for the phone. He was asking her to stop acting like a guilty person. I don't owe you anything, Bryn screamed, The rage poured out of her, hot and ugly. I don't owe anyone explanations. I am the bride. I am the one everyone is looking at. You are humiliating me. She spun around, wild-eyed, looking for an ally. She pointed a trembling finger at me, the phone still clutched in her other hand like a grenade. She did this, Bryn wailed. She is ruining everything. She came here to destroy me because she is jealous. She is a loser. Graham, she is nothing. And you are listening to her over me? Celeste rushed forward then. She moved with the speed of a crisis manager trying to contain a chemical spill. She placed her body between Bryn and the staring guests, throwing her arms out as if to physically shield her daughter from the judgment radiating from the valet stand. She is overwhelmed, Celeste announced to the crowd, her voice pitching up into a frantic chirp. Can't you see? She is exhausted. The stress of the planning, the heat, and then Kira provoking her like this. It is too much for anyone. Celeste turned to Graham, her eyes pleading, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. Graham, please, put the phone away. She is just having a moment. We will talk about this in the morning. Just let her breathe. But Graham did not look at Celeste. He was watching Bryn's hands. She is not breathing, Celeste, Graham said flatly. She is deleting. The air went cold. We all looked. Bryn wasn't crying anymore. She had turned away from Graham, hunching her shoulders, and her thumbs were moving across the screen of Graham's phone with a frantic, blurring speed. She wasn't just holding the phone. She was purging it. She was deleting emails. She was deleting messages. She was trying to erase history in real time, under the floodlights of a luxury resort, in a wedding dress that cost $10,000. Bryn, Graham said, taking a step forward. Stop it. I am not doing anything, Bryn yelled, not looking up, her thumbs still tapping furiously. I am turning it off. You need to focus on me. You are destroying evidence, Graham said. He didn't lunge for her. He didn't try to wrestle the phone away. He just stood there and watched her, and the look on his face was far more devastating than anger. It was disgust. It was the look of a man watching a stranger defile something he used to love. Bryn let out a frustrated grunt, tapped the screen one last hard time, and then, as if realizing that 20 people were watching her commit digital obstruction, her hands suddenly went limp. The phone fell. It hit the cobblestones face down with a sickening crack. Bryn gasped, bringing her hands to her mouth in a performance of shock that would not have convinced a toddler. Oh, she cried. Oh my God, it slipped. Graham, I am so sorry. My hands are so sweaty. I didn't mean to. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, begging him to believe the lie, begging him to accept the play. But the silence in the driveway was absolute. The wedding photographer, who had followed the group out hoping to capture a candid moment of the couple leaving, slowly lowered his camera. He let the strap slide off his shoulder and capped the lens. It was a small gesture, but it signaled the end of the illusion. He wasn't shooting a wedding anymore. He was witnessing a crime scene. The guests standing by the fountain stopped pretending to chat. The judge's wife was staring openly, her mouth slightly ajar. The valet was watching with the grim fascination of a witness to a car wreck. Nobody believed the phone had slipped. Graham looked down at the shattered device on the ground. He didn't pick it up. He looked at it like it was a dead body. It slipped, Graham repeated, his voice devoid of inflection. Yes, Bryn said, stepping toward him, reaching for his lapels. It was an accident. Just like the paperwork was an accident. We can fix it, Graham. We can get you a new phone. We can fix everything. Graham stepped back. He moved physically out of her reach, as if her touch was contagious. You can't fix this, he said. Wade saw the shift. He saw Graham pulling away, saw the guests whispering, saw the narrative slipping through his fingers like sand. He needed a villain. He needed a target. He turned to me. I was still standing by the car door, watching the implosion with a calm that seemed to infuriate him. I wasn't smirking. I wasn't gloating. I was just bearing witness. You, Wade bellowed. pointing a thick finger at me. "This is your fault." He turned to the bewildered resort staff, a young manager in a blazer and 2 security guards who had drifted over, looking unsure of who to tackle. "Get her out of here," Wade commanded, his face purple with exertion. "She is trespassing. She is harassing the bride. Remove her from the property immediately." The security guards hesitated. They looked at Wade, red-faced and screaming. They looked at Bryn, hysterical and shivering in her satin. They looked at the shattered phone on the ground. And then they looked at me. I was standing perfectly still. I was wearing a modest navy dress. My hands were at my sides. I hadn't raised my voice once in the last 10 minutes. I wasn't the one throwing phones. I wasn't the one screaming. For the first time all night, the reality of the situation was visible to everyone, even the hired help. The unstable daughter was the only person in the driveway who looked like she had a grip on reality. "Sir," the young manager said, stepping forward cautiously, addressing Wade, "the lady appears to be leaving on her own. I don't think—" "I said throw her out," Wade screamed, veins bulging in his neck. "She is poison. She came here to destroy this family." "Wade," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The quiet authority in my voice cut through his bluster effortlessly. "I am not the one who destroyed this family," I said. "I am just the one who stopped paying for the upkeep." I looked at Graham one last time. He was looking at the ground, at the broken phone, lost in the wreckage of his life. "Check the cloud backup, Graham," I said softly. Graham's head snapped up. "Phones break," I said. "Data doesn't, unless she deleted it from the server. The timestamps are still there." Bryn let out a strangled noise, a sound of pure despair. I turned to Marin. "Let's go," I said. Wade took a step toward me, his fists clenched, as if he intended to physically stop me from having the last word, but Marin stepped between us. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him, a successful, powerful architect looking at a man who was unraveling at the seams, and raised a single eyebrow. Wade froze. He looked around at the guests, at the security guards, at the judge's wife. He realized that if he touched us, if he made one more move, he wouldn't just be the father of the bride, he would be the defendant. I got into the car. I sat down on the leather seat and pulled the door shut. The heavy thud of the door closing sealed out the humidity, the smell of jasmine, and the sound of Bryn's weeping. Marin slid into the driver's seat. She didn't look at the family. She started the engine, put the car in gear, and eased us forward. "Are you okay?" Marin asked quietly as we rolled past the portico. I looked out the window. We passed them. Wade was shouting at the security manager. Celeste was holding Bryn, who was sobbing into her shoulder, her white dress pooling on the dirty cobblestones. Graham was kneeling on the ground, picking up the pieces of his phone, alone in the middle of the crowd. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a funeral procession for a life I had finally truly buried. "I am not okay," I said, watching them disappear into the darkness of the rearview mirror. "But I am finished." We drove out of the resort gates, past the perfectly manicured hedges and the security booth. We turned onto the main road, the headlights cutting a path through the dark, humid night. I didn't feel happy. You don't feel happy when you watch a building collapse. Even if you hated the architecture, you just feel relief that you weren't inside when it fell. "Drive," I said to Marin. "Just drive." And for the first time in 9 years. I didn't look back to see if they were chasing me. I knew they weren't. They were too busy eating each other alive. The silence inside the car was not empty. It was heavy, packed tight with the things we had not said and the things we could no longer ignore. Outside the windows, the Georgia landscape rushed by in a blur of Spanish moss and darkness, the humidity of the coast giving way to the cooler, cleaner air of the highway. It felt like the atmosphere after a thunderstorm, when the pressure finally drops and the sky feels scoured clean. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the passenger window. My hands were folded in my lap. They were perfectly still. The shaking had stopped the moment we cleared the resort gates. It was strange, but I felt clearer than I had in years. The worst thing had happened. The confrontation, the public exposure, the collision of my two worlds. And I was still standing. I was still employed. I was still me. Marin drove with her usual precision, her eyes scanning the road, but I could feel her glancing at me every few minutes. "You know," Marin said, her voice cutting through the hum of the tires on the asphalt, "you were terrifying back there." "I was angry," I said. "No," Marin corrected me gently. "Bryn was angry. Wade was angry. You were inevitable. It was like watching a natural disaster that had learned how to file paperwork." I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Is that a compliment?" "Remind me never to lie to you about our taxes," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "Yes, it is a compliment." Her phone, mounted on the dashboard, lit up. It wasn't a call. It was an encrypted message notification, the kind that meant business. Marin glanced at it, her expression shifting from supportive spouse to corporate architect. "It is Arthur," she said, referring to the senior partner at her firm. "He is tapping into the grapevine." "And?" I asked, watching the road. "Graham's firm is already in damage control mode," Marin said, reading the preview text as we slowed for a toll booth. "Apparently, Graham called his compliance officer from the lobby phone 5 minutes after we left. He didn't wait for Monday. He flagged the entire audit for internal review due to newly discovered fraudulent documentation. He is trying to get ahead of it," I said. "He is trying to prove he was a victim of the fraud, not a perpetrator." "It might work for him," Marin said. "Arthur says the rumors are already flying that the merger deal is on hold. People are asking questions, the kind of questions that don't get answered with a press release." I nodded. Graham was saving himself. He was sacrificing Bryn to the wolves of the Securities and Exchange Commission to keep his own license intact. It was ruthless, but it was rational. It was exactly what I would have expected a man like him to do once the fog of love had been blown away by the gale force of a felony. Then my own phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a priority alert from the Vantage Weld internal server. My stomach turned over. I picked up the phone. Unlocking it with a thumbprint, the screen was bright in the dark car. The notification was from the Ethics and Compliance portal. Alert. New case file opened regarding analyst K. Whitfield. Subject: conflict of interest/malicious conduct. I stared at the words. I wasn't surprised. I had anticipated this. In fact, I had been counting down the minutes until it arrived. "What is it?" Marin asked, hearing the shift in my breathing. "The family playbook," I said, my voice flat. "Smear first, explain later." I opened the alert. It was a formal complaint filed through the external tip line, flagged as urgent. The sender was anonymous, of course, but the language was unmistakably Wade's. The complaint alleged that I had concealed a familial relationship with the subject of the audit, Bryn, specifically to weaponize my position for personal vendetta and financial extortion. It claimed I was mentally unstable, vindictive, and had threatened the family with ruin if they didn't pay me off. They were trying to flip the board. They knew they couldn't deny the fraud. Graham had already seen the documents, so they were attacking the credibility of the auditor. If they could paint me as a vengeful, crazy sister who planted evidence or manipulated the data out of spite, they might be able to get the audit thrown out, or at least tied up in litigation for years. "They are calling me vindictive," I told Marin. "They are claiming I solicited a bribe." "They are desperate," Marin said, her knuckles tightening on the steering wheel. "Do you need to call your boss?" "No," I said. "Calling looks defensive. Documentation looks professional." I closed the email app and opened a secure folder on my cloud drive. It was a folder I hadn't opened in 4 years. It was labeled simply, Archive, Inside. There were subfolders organized by year, going back to the day I left Briar Glen. It was my survival kit. It was the insurance policy Calvin Norwood had told me to build. I scrolled past the photos of bruised arms. I scrolled past the text messages where Bryn called me names that would make a sailor blush. I didn't need emotional sympathy. I needed tactical precision. I needed proof that my estrangement wasn't a recent vendetta, but a decade-long protective measure against financial abuse. I found the subfolder labeled audio. I put in my earbuds. I didn't want Marin to hear this. I didn't want that poison filling the car. I selected a file dated August, 9 years ago. Click. The sound of rustling paper filled my ears. Then the sound of a chair scraping against tile. You want college? Wade's voice. It sounded younger, stronger, but the arrogance was identical. Be independent. I am just asking for a loan, my teenage voice replied, sounding small and terrified. No, if you want it, you earn it. We are not handing you a free ride. I stopped the track. It was short. It was brutal. It established that they had cut me off financially nearly a decade ago. It disproved the narrative that I was currently extorting them. I scrolled down to a second file. This one was dated 6 months later. It was a recording of a dinner conversation I had captured when I came home to drop off rent money. Click, the sound of wine being poured, the clink of silver on china. Bryn is just... she has that spark. Celeste's voice purred. We have to invest in her. Wade, the sorority, the car, the wardrobe. It is not spending, it is positioning. She is the one worth investing in. Kira, well, Kira is meant for labor, Bryn is meant for legacy. I paused the track. She is the one worth investing in. It was the perfect counter-argument to their claim that I was jealous of Bryn's earned success. It proved that her financial status was manufactured by them, funded by the very money they claimed to not have. I selected the 2 files. I didn't add the screaming matches. I didn't add the tears. Just the cold, hard financial facts. I opened my work email and composed a message to the senior legal counsel at VantageWeld. Subject: context regarding anonymous complaint filed against analyst K. Whitfield. To whom it may concern, I am writing to preemptively address a complaint that I believe has been, or is about to be, filed regarding my conduct on the Kessler audit. The subject of the audit, Graham Kessler, has recently married my estranged sister, Bryn Whitfield. I was unaware of this connection until this evening. The complaint likely alleges bias or vindictiveness. Please find attached 2 audio files dating from 9 years ago which establish a long-standing pattern of financial estrangement initiated by my parents. Wade and Celeste Whitfield. These files demonstrate that my lack of contact with the family was a protective measure against financial coercion, not a prelude to extortion. I have not had a financial relationship with these individuals in 9 years. My findings in the Kessler audit are based solely on the data provided by the client. I am prepared to submit to a full internal review of my work. Regards, Kira Whitfield. I attached the files. I hit send. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. I felt the cool, clinical satisfaction of a surgeon who has successfully clamped a bleeding artery. They wanted to drag me into the mud. I was staying on the pavement. Done? Marin asked, glancing at me. Sent to legal, I said. Let them try to explain why their unstable daughter has 9 years of time-stamped receipts. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. It was from Calvin Norwood. I hadn't spoken to Calvin in 6 months, but he always knew when the weather was changing in Briar Glen. Calvin, your parents are calling people back home. They are on the warpath. Wade called the pastor. Celeste is on the phone with the country club board. They are trying to control the story before it hits the gossip mill. I typed back. Let them talk. Graham knows. Calvin. It is not just talk. Kid. They are panicked. I drove past their house. The lights are off. They are not there. A cold chill went down my spine. Calvin. They told your Aunt Marge they are handling a family emergency in the city. They are driving to you. I stared at the screen. They are coming, I said. The words tasted like ash. Who? Marin asked, her voice sharpening. Celeste and Wade, I said. They are not going home to Pennsylvania. They are coming to the city. They are coming to my office. They wouldn't dare, Marin said. You have security. You have a badge. They don't care about badges, I said. They think they can talk their way out of this. They think if they get me in a room, if they corner me, they can bully me into retracting the audit. They are going to call it a family emergency to get past the front desk. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was nearly midnight. They will be there Monday morning, I said. They are going to try to ambush me at work. Marin signaled and changed lanes, moving us into the fast lane. The engine purred as the car accelerated, putting more distance between us and the coast, but I knew that distance was an illusion. The Whitfields were not going to let go. They were like an infection that refused to be treated. They were coming to my sanctuary. They were coming to the one place where I was defined by my competence, not my bloodline. Let them come, Marin said, her voice hard. Vantage Weld has better security than a wedding venue, and you are not 17 anymore. No, I agreed, closing my eyes and leaning back against the seat. I am not, and this time, I am not the one who is going to be evicted. The phone pinged one last time. Calvin. Watch your back. Kira. A drowning man will climb on top of you to breathe. I turned the phone off. I didn't need the warning. I could already feel the water rising. But for the first time in my life, I knew how to swim. The lobby of Vantage Weld headquarters was a cathedral of glass, steel, and aggressive transparency. It was designed to intimidate anyone who had something to hide, which made it the perfect setting for a Monday morning reunion with my parents. I was sitting at my desk on the 42nd floor, staring at a dual-monitor setup that displayed the wreckage of the Kessler audit, when the internal line rang. It was the head of building security, a man named Marcus, who had spent 20 years in military intelligence and had zero patience for drama. Ms. Whitfield, Marcus said, his voice calm and metallic through the receiver. I have two individuals at the front desk, Wade and Celeste Whitfield. They are claiming to have a family emergency and are demanding access to your floor. They are becoming vocal. I closed my eyes for a second, listening to the hum of the server room down the hall. I had expected this. I had predicted it in the car with Marin. But knowing the storm is coming does not stop the rain from getting you wet. There is no emergency, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice level. They are here to intimidate an employee. Understood, Marcus said. I can have them escorted off the property. Mr. Whitfield is currently shouting at the receptionist about his constitutional rights. No, I said. If we throw them out, they will stand on the sidewalk and scream to the press. They will make a scene that we cannot control. I will come down. Ms. Whitfield, I don't advise that, Marcus said. I am not meeting them alone, I clarified. I need you to secure Conference Room B on the ground floor. It has glass walls. It is visible to the entire lobby, and I need you to call Linda from HR. I want a witness present for every second of this interaction. 10 minutes later, I stepped off the elevator. The lobby was bustling with the morning rush. Analysts carrying coffees, executives checking their phones, the low murmur of billion-dollar commerce. In the center of it all, near the security turnstiles, stood Wade and Celeste. They looked tragically out of place. In Briar Glen, they looked like royalty. Here, against the sharp lines of modern corporate architecture, they looked like relics. Wade was wearing his country club blazer, his face a mottled red that clashed with the cool blue lighting of the lobby. Celeste was in a pastel suit that looked too soft, too frivolous for a room where decisions were made in hard currency. They saw me approaching. Celeste's face instantly shifted from imperious annoyance to a mask of tragic relief. She took a step toward the turnstiles, reaching out as if to embrace me across the security barrier. "Kira!" she cried, her voice pitching up to ensure the nearby receptionists heard her maternal anguish. "Oh, thank God. We have been so worried. Why didn't you answer our calls?" I swiped my badge, the beep sounding like a judge's gavel, and walked through the gate. I did not hug her. I did not stop. "Conference room," I said, not slowing down. "Now," Wade bristled, his jaw setting in that familiar bulldog line. "Now see here, Kira, you do not order us around. We need to talk in private. "We are going to your office." "You are not going anywhere near my office," I said, stopping and turning to face him. "You are visitors. You are a security risk. You can either walk into that conference room with me and the HR representative waiting inside, or Marcus can physically remove you. Choose." Wade looked at Marcus, who was standing 10 feet away with his arms crossed, looking like a granite statue. Wade adjusted his tie, muttered something about ungrateful children, and walked toward the conference room. The room was transparent. It was a fishbowl. Everyone in the lobby could see in, but the glass was soundproof. It was a power move, and I saw Wade realize it the moment he sat down. He couldn't scream. He couldn't throw things. If he acted out, he would be providing a show for the entire morning shift of a Fortune 500 company. I sat at the head of the table. Linda, the senior HR director, sat to my right with a notepad and a neutral expression that was more terrifying than a frown. "This is Linda," I said. "She is here to witness this conversation. Anything you say is being noted for the company record." "Is this necessary?" Celeste asked, her eyes welling with tears that appeared on command. She reached across the table. Trying to take my hand, I pulled it back. "We are family. Kira, we didn't raise you to be this cold." The sentence hung in the air, dripping with the fake nostalgia they used to rewrite history. They wanted to pretend that my boundaries were a defect in my personality, rather than a survival mechanism they had installed. "You didn't raise me. Celeste," I said. My voice was quiet, steady, and devoid of the emotion she wanted to provoke. "You managed me. You audited my existence and decided I was a liability. Do not confuse overhead with parenting." Celeste flinched as if I had slapped her. She pulled a handkerchief from her purse, dabbing at eyes that were dry behind the performance. Wade slammed his hand on the table. It was a heavy, dull thud. "Enough of this corporate psychobabble," Wade growled. He leaned forward, invading my space. "You know why we are here. You need to fix this. Fix what you did to Bryn." "I didn't do anything to Bryn," I said. "You ruined her wedding," Wade shouted. Forgetting the glass walls, I saw a few people in the lobby turn their heads. "You humiliated her in front of the Kesslers. Graham is talking about an annulment. Kira, an annulment. Do you have any idea what that does to our standing?" "Graham is talking about an annulment because he married a woman who doesn't exist," I said. "He married a resume of lies that you helped her write." "It was a misunderstanding," Wade insisted. "We were protecting her future. And you just had to show up and rub her nose in it. You could have stayed quiet. You could have left when you saw it was family." "I was doing my job," I said. "And Bryn collapsed. I didn't push her. Wade, I didn't trip her. She fell under the weight of questions she should have been able to answer if she had actually lived the life she claimed." "You provoked her," Celeste interjected, her voice sharpening, dropping the tearful mother act. "You went there to settle a score, and now Graham is digging through everything. He is asking about the trust fund. He is asking about the property transfers." "He is doing his due diligence," I said, "which is what he should have done 6 months ago." "You are going to stop him," Wade commanded. It wasn't a request. "You are going to go to Graham. You are going to tell him that the audit was flawed. You are going to tell him that you made a mistake with the data. You are going to clear Bryn's name." I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't just asking me to lie. He was asking me to commit career suicide. He was asking me to torch my professional reputation, facing federal charges for falsifying an audit, just to save Bryn from the consequences of her own fraud. "No," I said. "Excuse me?" Wade's face went purple. "I said no," I repeated. "I will not lie for you. I will not break the law for you, and I certainly will not sacrifice my career to patch up a hole in your sinking ship." Celeste shifted tactics instantly. She saw that bullying wouldn't work, so she went for the soft underbelly. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the way she used to speak when she was gossiping about neighbors. "Think about your reputation, Kira," she said. "People talk. We have already had to field calls from people asking why you are so vindictive. It doesn't look good for an auditor to be seen attacking her own sister. If this gets out, if people start thinking you are unstable, that you have a vendetta, you could lose this job. We are just trying to protect you from yourself. It was the threat from the night before. Repackaged as concern. Do what we say, or we will tell the world you are crazy. I looked at Linda. Linda made a note on her pad. I reached into my leather portfolio. I pulled out a manila envelope. It was thin, but it felt heavier than lead. I expected you to bring up my reputation, I said, and I expected you to threaten my job. That is why I brought this. I slid the envelope across the polished mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Wade. What is this? Wade asked, looking at it with suspicion. Open it, I said. Wade hesitated, then ripped the flap open. He pulled out a single stack of stapled papers. It wasn't a complex document. It was a credit report. Specifically, a historical credit report from 7 years ago, highlighted in neon yellow. When I left Briar Glen, I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the room, I had 0 credit. I had no loans. I had no assets. I was invisible. Wade looked at the paper. His eyes scanned the highlighted lines. I watched the blood drain from his face. It was a slow, involuntary reaction. The physiological response of a man who realizes the skeleton in his closet has just walked into the room wearing a wire. 3 months after I left, I continued, a loan was taken out in my name, $50,000. It was a signature loan for home improvements on a property in a town I have never visited. The co-signer was W. Whitfield. Celeste froze. She stopped breathing. She stared at Wade, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I found this 4 years ago, I said. I traced the IP address used for the application. It came from the router in your home office. Wade. The money was deposited into an account that was closed 6 months later, but not before the funds were transferred to a dealership for a BMW that Bryn drove for her sophomore year. This, Wade stammered. His hands were shaking. This is a mistake, a clerical error. It is identity theft, I corrected him. It is wire fraud, and because the loan was processed across state lines, it is federal. You wouldn't, Celeste whispered. She looked at me with genuine horror now, not because I was ungrateful, but because I was dangerous. I didn't, I said. I held on to it. I paid off the loan myself. Wade, it took me 3 years. I ate ramen noodles and worked overtime to pay off a $50,000 car for the sister who called me a loser. Why? Wade asked, his voice hoarse. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to be free more than I wanted to be right, I said. I thought if I paid the ransom, you would leave me alone. I thought that was the price of my independence. I leaned forward. But you didn't leave me alone, I said. You came to my office. You threatened my job. You questioned my sanity in front of my employer. I pointed to the document in his hands. That is a copy, I said. The original is with my lawyer, along with the bank tracing numbers and the affidavit from the dealership. Wade dropped the paper. He looked old suddenly. The bluster was gone. The entitlement was gone. He looked like a man standing in the ruins of his own arrogance. What do you want? Wade asked. I want you to sign a document, I said. I signaled to Linda. She reached into her folder and produced a formal cease and desist letter, drafted by legal earlier that morning. She slid it across the table. This states that you will not contact me again, I explained. You will not call my office. You will not show up at my home. You will not speak my name to the press, to Graham Kessler, or to anyone else. You will disappear from my life as completely as you tried to make me disappear from yours. Wade looked at the document. He looked at the credit report. He realized the math. If he signed, he lost a daughter. If he didn't sign, he went to prison. And if we sign? Celeste asked, her voice trembling. What about Graham? What about the audit? The audit proceeds based on the facts, I said. I cannot save you from the mess you made with the pension fund. That is out of my hands. But regarding the identity theft, if you sign, and if you stay away, the file stays in my lawyer's safe. Wade picked up the pen. His hand was heavy. He signed his name. He didn't read the terms. He knew he had no leverage left. He pushed the paper back to me. "Are you happy?" Celeste asked bitterly. "You have destroyed us." "I haven't destroyed anything," I said, standing up. "I just turned on the lights." I picked up the signed document and the envelope. I looked down at them one last time. They looked small inside the glass box. They looked like strangers. "One last thing," I said. Wade looked up, his eyes dull. "If you ever come near my life again," I said, delivering the line that I knew would haunt them more than any lawsuit. "If you send a text, if you spread a rumor, if you try to rewrite history one more time, I stop protecting your image, I release the file, and I will let the world see exactly what kind of parents creates a child like me." I turned and walked toward the glass door. "Goodbye, Wade. Goodbye, Celeste." I walked out of the conference room and into the lobby. I didn't look back to see them sitting there. I walked toward the elevators, past the security desk, where Marcus gave me a subtle nod. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 42nd floor. As the doors closed, shutting out the sight of the parents who had managed me, I finally felt it. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was silence. The beautiful, empty silence of a debt finally paid in full. 3 days after I walked out of the glass conference room at Vantage Weld, the confirmation arrived in my inbox. It was not a dramatic announcement. It was a standard, encrypted email from the private counsel I had retained to handle the identity theft file. The subject line was simply, "Case preservation status." I opened it. The language was dry, procedural, and beautiful. It confirmed that the affidavit regarding the $50,000 fraudulent loan had been notarized, sealed, and filed in a secure escrow. It was not an active lawsuit yet. It was a sword of Damocles, hanging by a single horsehair over Wade and Celeste's heads. If they spoke my name, if they leaked a lie, the thread would snap, and the federal charges would drop. It was controlled. It was real. It was the only language they understood. That afternoon, Marin came into my home office. She was holding her phone, looking at it with a strange expression, half pity, half vindication. "Graham just called me," she said. I turned away from my screens. "Is he threatening a countersuit?" "No," Marin said, sitting on the edge of my desk. "He called to let me know that the wedding is officially postponed. The press release went out 10 minutes ago. They are citing unforeseen family health matters." "That is polite," I said. "Privately," Marin continued, "he told me it is over. He has moved out of the townhouse. He is staying at a hotel downtown while his lawyers disassemble his life." She paused, looking down at her phone. "And Kira? It gets worse." "How can it get worse than federal audit fraud?" I asked. "Because he started verifying the rest of it," Marin said. "After you left the driveway, Graham hired a private investigator to vet Bryn, not the financials this time, the biography." I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. "And?" "She didn't just exaggerate her timeline," Marin said. "She fabricated it. Graham called the gallery in New York where Bryn claimed she was an associate curator for 2 years. They have no record of her employment. They have a record of her applying for an internship and being rejected." I stared at Marin. The gallery job was the cornerstone of Bryn's identity. It was the story she told at every holiday, the reason she claimed she was too busy to visit, the proof that she was the artistic genius of the family while I was just the grunt worker. "So where was she?" I asked. "She was living in an apartment Wade paid for," Marin said. "She was shopping. She was posting photos of art she didn't curate and attending parties she wasn't invited to. The consulting fees from the shell company weren't just for tax evasion. Kira, they were her allowance. Wade and Celeste were paying her a salary to pretend she had a career." I leaned back in my chair. The magnitude of the lie was breathtaking. They hadn't just protected her. They had constructed a Truman Show reality for her. populated by fake accolades and bought success, all to maintain the image that the good daughter was thriving while the independent daughter struggled. Graham's world, the world of hard assets and verifiable data, could not tolerate a phantom. He hadn't just married a fraud. He had married a ghost. "He is checking everything now," Marin said. "The volunteer work, the awards. He thinks even the engagement story she told the magazines might be a lie." He sounded shattered. "He asked me to tell you he is sorry." "I don't need his apology," I said quietly. "He is paying a high enough price already." The collapse wasn't limited to Graham's penthouse. By the end of the week, the shockwaves had reached Briar Glen. Calvin Norwood sent me a text on Friday. It was brief. The narrative is breaking. According to Calvin, Wade and Celeste had returned home expecting to play the victims. They had prepared a story about my mental instability, about a jealousy-fueled scene that forced them to delay the wedding for everyone's safety. They went to the country club ready to receive sympathy, but the questions started before they could even order a drink. It wasn't because of me. It was because of the audit. When the Securities and Exchange Commission starts investigating a company for pension fraud, they freeze assets, and when assets are frozen, checks bounce. People in Briar Glen noticed when checks bounced. The florist called the house because the final payment for the bridal bouquets had been declined. The caterer called because the deposit for the reception refund was locked in an account flagged by the Department of Justice. Wade tried to bluster. He tried to tell the neighbors it was a banking error, but then the employer started calling. Graham's firm had subpoenaed records from Wade's business partners, looking for other shell companies. The neighbors stopped asking, "How was the wedding?" and started asking, "Why did the bank investigator park in your driveway?" They couldn't spin it. You can gaslight a daughter, but you cannot gaslight a federal ledger. The whispers in town weren't about my scene anymore. They were about why Wade Whitfield was selling his second car and why Celeste had resigned from the charity board effective immediately. My own workplace was the final battlefield to go silent. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after the ambush in the lobby, I received a notification from the Ethics and Compliance Officer. The case regarding the anonymous complaint, the one Wade had filed claiming I was vindictive, was closed. The report was attached. It was short. Finding: the evidence provided by the employee, specifically the time-stamped audio recordings demonstrating a 10-year history of financial estrangement, conclusively refutes the allegation of recent extortion or conflict of interest. The complaint is deemed to be without merit and potentially retaliatory in nature. Analyst K. Whitfield is cleared of all misconduct. Employee identity protection protocols remain in effect. I saved the email. I didn't forward it. I didn't print it out to frame it. I just dragged it into the archive folder, right next to the audio clips of my father telling me to be independent. The smear attempt had failed because, for the first time, my history wasn't a source of shame. It was evidence, the very thing they had used to hurt me. My isolation, my poverty, my struggle, was the shield that protected my career. There was no viral explosion. There was no trending hashtag. Bryn didn't become famous for being a villain. Instead, she became something she feared far more: a quiet scandal. Her perfect day became the kind of story people told in hushed tones over dinner. A cautionary tale about hubris. She wasn't a spectacle. She was a mistake. She moved back into Wade and Celeste's house, not as the conquering bride, but as the 30-year-old daughter with no resume, no husband, and a name that showed up in federal court filings. She deleted her social media accounts. The channels where she had curated her fake life went dark. The silence she left behind was louder than any screaming match we could have had. I could have gloated. I could have sent a message to Bryn asking how the consulting business was going. I could have driven to Briar Glen and parked my car, my paid-off car, in their driveway just to watch them twitch. But I didn't. I refused to re-enter their theater. I had spent so many years auditioning for their love, then fighting for their respect, then bargaining for their acknowledgement. To go back now, even to spike the football, would be an admission that I still cared about the game. I didn't care. On Saturday morning, I woke up without an alarm. The sun was streaming through the sheer curtains of my bedroom, painting the floor in squares of light. The house was quiet. "Breakfast?" Marin asked from the doorway. She was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun. "Yes," I said, "but not here. Let's go out." We went to a diner 3 blocks away. It wasn't the kind of place that served champagne or canapes. It smelled of coffee and bacon grease. The tables were formica, and the waitress called everyone honey. I ordered waffles. I drank cheap coffee from a thick ceramic mug. I watched Marin laugh at something on her phone, the sunlight catching the gray in her hair that she earned running her own company. I looked around the diner. There were families eating pancakes. There were construction workers on a break. It was completely, beautifully ordinary. And I realized that ordinary is the new luxury, peace without performance, a life where the bills are paid, the relationships are real, and the phone doesn't ring with threats disguised as advice. "What are you thinking about?" Marin asked, catching me staring into my coffee. "I am thinking about the price of admission," I said. "It cost me everything to get here, but the coffee is good." Marin smiled and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "The coffee is excellent." Calvin sent me one final update that evening. I saw Wade at the hardware store. He looks 10 years older. He didn't see me, or maybe he pretended not to. They are furious. Kira, they are angry at the world, at Graham, at the banks, but mostly, they are scared. I typed back, "Why are they scared? They signed the deal. I won't leak the file." Calvin's reply came 3 dots at a time. They are scared because for the first time in their lives, they can't rewrite the ending. They can't edit you out. You are the one holding the pen now, and they know it. I put the phone down. I walked out to my balcony. The city lights were spread out before me, a grid of electricity and life. I thought about the girl who had packed her life into trash bags in the middle of the night. I thought about the girl who scrubbed office toilets while her sister bragged about a career that didn't exist. They had told me to be independent. They had thrown the word at me like a curse, expecting me to break under its weight. They thought independence meant isolation. They thought it meant punishment. They were wrong. Independence wasn't a punishment anymore. It became my shield. It became the spine that held me upright when they tried to crush me. It became the freedom to sit in a diner and eat waffles without wondering if I owed someone a thank you note for the privilege of existing. I looked at the city, at the life I had built brick by brick, receipt by receipt. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was finished. And this time, I didn't walk away empty. I walked away whole. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below sharing your location and your thoughts on how Kira handled her family. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Nina Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need to see the truth win. Your support means the world to me.